All right, I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you are listening to The Nick and Joe Show on the Think Radio Broadcast Network. And dare I ask, are you there, Nick?
You can ask. You can always ask.
We've had such bad luck, technically in that. Every now and almost every show we have some sort of a glitch. Anyway.
Yeah, the glitches are getting smaller.
The glitches are getting smaller. All right. So, so we spent the first half hour talking about the whole residential school thing, and I think it's time for us to set that one aside as well, except to say one final thing on the subject, Nick, and that is that, you were talking about statues and things like that, but look, keep this building open if you want and turn it into some sort of a museum. And, when I think about Auschwitz, how they've turned that place into a museum, and a handful of the other former concentration camps, death camps, and let people come and see. And let's, don't hide, don't sugarcoat anything. Let people see what were the problems with these particular schools, and let them judge for themselves. And I think that, that would be probably the best response to all of this. And I would support, if the government said they wanted to put money into such a project, I'd say, yeah, that's something I could get behind.
Yeah, I think in that case, too, because you know how we feel about government spending on this show. But in something like that, see, this is why there is a place for government in preserving things. Like, look at the War Museum, look at the Museum of Science and Technology. All these different... The only museum I really wonder about is the Museum of Human Rights out there in Winnipeg. What do you put in there? Anyway, be that as it may, in general, the government does have a role to preserve our heritage and our history, and that's one way of doing it is to run museums. The Royal Ontario Museum is a classic example. But when it comes to this kind of thing, I'm just afraid that that it's going to take on a life of its own. I don't know that it'll be the best. Well, you know what? Let's hope they do it right, and I'll leave it at that.
Good enough. Okay, over to you, Nick.
Okay. Well, one thing okay. This week we saw. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. One of the questions I've been asking myself.
Nick's a professional.
Make sure I'm on the right.
Nick's a professional broadcaster. You can tell.
Yeah, you can tell. Yeah. Anyway, one of the things I've noticed this week is that there is something going on in our economy and in our society that maybe we should have seen it coming, but I'm noticing a trend, especially out here in the country, where people have had their homes or the places they're renting sold out from underneath them. Now, then, that in and of itself is not bad. It's a part of life. If you rent from someone, if you rent a home or an apartment and the building gets sold, then you're probably going to have to go find a new place to live. But right now, with the market the way that it is, there's no place to go because everybody's doing it. Anybody who's got any value and they want to cash in on this craze right now, spending 2-3 times more than a home is worth to buy to buy a piece of property outside the city. The people who are renters now are out on the street and can't find any place to go. So a lot of people are resorting to moving into RV trailers and moving out into kind of for lack of a better term, the backwoods. Well, that's not a really good trend. I mean, it makes me uncomfortable to think about that because RV trailers are not designed to be 4 seasons. And in January, it can and does get really, really cold out here. So when you think about that and you look at the housing market for what it is, not only do these people not have any place to go and no prospect of getting anything soon, what about in 2 or 3 years? Let's say they live in these trailers and they have are able to scrape some money up because now they've worked out a deal with a landowner or something, and who knows what their scenario is, but they've been able to cobble away some money with the idea of buying a house. Well, you got to have a whole lot more money now to put as a deposit down on a house, and you get a lot less house than you used to. So what are these people supposed to do? Now, the question becomes, what role, if any, does the government play in this? My visceral reaction is none. Please go away. That's the first thing, because I have heard a saying several years ago I really like, and that is the government does nothing well and most things poorly. And I think in a lot of cases there's some pretty solid evidence for that. But I don't know. You have to look after these people. You can't just let them freeze to death. You can't just let them live out in an open field in a trailer never designed for that. And other people, for those who don't have that, what about them? Are we going to have to start putting up shanty towns or build more social housing? And how is this all going to play out? I have no idea. But it is a reality, and it is something that I think we need to talk about at least.
Well, Professor Ian Lee has a very interesting perspective on this, not so much from the angle of homelessness, but on the subject of out-of-control housing prices. And he points out that the people... Okay, so let's first back up a second and talk about urban planning and the notion that we should not be allowing our cities anymore to grow geographically or to spread out. So that is a decision that I think most cities have taken. Certainly here in Ottawa, that's more or less the plan. So what they want to do is they're saying, well, we have to preserve the natural environment. And so what we need to do is we need to intensify the current urban footprint by, allowing building upwards, if you will, instead of outwards.
Right.
And the problem with that is that the free market being what it is, when you refuse to allow cities to expand geographically, essentially what you're doing is you're creating land scarcity, housing land scarcity, developed land scarcity, which by definition, it drives the price up. And ironically, the people who benefit from the price increases, the appreciation of the property that you're living in, are quite often the people who are arguing the most strongly for a moratorium on housing development in the suburbs, if you will. And so, his argument is you have to, especially if you're bringing in lots of people from other countries. We have a very generous immigration system here, and we're bringing people in, and then we're not developing our cities or allowing our cities to grow naturally in order to provide people with affordable housing. And so it's the people, new Canadians or young Canadians who are just starting out that are finding that they can't afford to purchase, and in many cases can't even afford to rent. And so now the government response to that is, well, we're going to have minimum wage. Of course, they never set the minimum wage high enough for you to be able to make ends meet in the big cities like Toronto, or Vancouver. All they do is basically screw up people's by imposing a high minimum wage in towns and villages where you don't need that high minimum wage to make ends meet. So you screw those people, those business owners, at the same time. So Professor Lee's argument is at least part of the solution to this has to be allowing greater urban sprawl. And he points out, and I think quite rightly, that for those of you out there who are afraid that we're going to overpopulate the country, my suggestion is that you, once you're able to fly to Vancouver or fly to Halifax, rent a car, and spend a week or more driving across the country, because it's going to take you a week, and then come and tell me that we're on the verge of overpopulating this country.
Yeah, you don't even need to go that far. Just try to drive across Ontario.
Well, and, people don't understand. It takes 2 days to drive from one end of this province to the other. 2 days to drive across Ontario. It's a massive problem. And the thing that stands out the most when you do it is how underpopulated this province is.
Yeah, we are not, unlike what David Suzuki said, we're not full, not even close. I think the last time I looked, it was 0.6 of a person per square mile in the country. Now, granted, a lot of that land nobody could live on anyway. Muskeg is not prone to housing development, but still, it's not like downtown Bangkok, is it? You don't have 45 people per square foot or something. I mean, a little ridiculous, but you get the point.
Or Hong Kong.
Hong Kong.
And Professor Lee actually has referenced in some of the talks he's given on this subject, Hong Kong. And people ask him, what about Hong Kong? And he's going, Hong Kong is not Ottawa. And it's not Toronto. Right. And there are reasons why Hong Kong has developed the way Hong Kong has developed, okay? Please stop using other countries as reference points and say, well, they're doing it there, why can't we do it here?
Because we're not there and they're not here.
Yeah, and we don't need to. And by the way, okay, housing prices are not really cheap in Hong Kong either. Of course, I don't know what's happening right now with the communists having taken over that particular territory. So the big question now then, Nick, is, okay, and by the way, this is just one contributing factor. There are, the cost of housing, the cost of the taxes, property taxes, development taxes, sales taxes, tax. There's all kinds of piling on to on the development side, on the construction side, all kinds of reasons why the cost of housing is expensive. It's artificially inflated in many cases. The idea
that's true across the economy.
The idea that 2x4s have to have special government approval and certificates stamped on the 2x4 before you can use it to build a house.
Yeah, well, believe me, that's very well known out in this neck of the woods. A lot of people are asking, why can't I just go and find somebody who's got a sawmill and buy from him whatever lumber I want? Why does it have to have that burned-on mark by the government stating this has been, graded lumber? In other words, this is what you're talking about.
Right.
And because, look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at a 2x4 and decide whether it's got too many knots in it or it's twisted or cracked, all the things that degrade the quality of the lumber. All you got to do is have a cursory knowledge of what straight looks like and how many knot holes are in it, and all of a sudden you can decide for yourself whether or not it's something you want to build your house out of.
Now,
you don't need to have all this sort of